The structure of this presentation today reflects my ongoing focus on Torah U'Mad'a, a methodology that seeks specific consilience at the intersection of traditional Judaism and Darwinism. I will suggest that the evolutionary and Judaic significance given to human hair is about more than just the epidermal filaments that project upwards and outwards from our skin. I'm going to deliver the paper in two parts. Part one surveys hair growth, morphologies, and hairstyling practices among disparate peoples. Kind of a survey with lots of pictures. In part two, I explore the sacred texts, the interesting examples within them of hair's centrality in Jewish history and the elaboration of halachot. In The Descent of Man, Charles Darwin judged primate patterns of hair growth as secondary sexual characteristics, potent reproductive displays. He noticed that many species are adorned with combinations of beards, whiskers, and mustaches. In line with his observation that hair growth is manifestly dimorphic, Darwin noted that facial hair was more abundantly expressed in males than in female primates. About humans, he wrote that women became divested of hair for ornamental purposes. Women of all races are less hairy than men. Darwin claimed that primate facial hair does not develop until maturity. Male monkeys acquired their beards as ornaments preferred by females. Based on the evidence, he became certain that hair location and color must be the product of sexual selection. Explaining why humans have less body and facial hair than other primates, Darwin explained that this could have been selected to display disease-free, attractive skin that would otherwise be obscured by excessive hair. Robin Dunbar offered an alternate explanation. Once proto-humans kept cooler by standing upright and walking, cooling off would have been facilitated by sweating through the pores of relatively bare skin. W.D. Hamilton wrote this about hair and sexual selection. He wrote, "Man's hairlessness was superimposed upon a creature socially attracted to and stimulated by hair. Hair on the human head, in particular, tends to be the focus of tactile stimulation during courtship, much as today we like to stroke our furry house pets." In parts of Africa, human was defined as one whose hair grows mainly on the head. Yoruba-speaking people in Nigeria thought children born with knotted hair were lucky and left their hair uncut to form dreadlocks. In Chinese antiquity, hairstyles reflected social status. Men were required to shave the top of their heads and grow a pigtail in the back. Aztec boys wore ponytails on the top of their heads until they captured or killed an enemy, after which they could wear it as a top knot. Aztec priests let their hair grow long, but covered it in public with a hooded black coat. Unmarried Aztec women wore hair long and loose, while married women displayed their hair in two horn-like tufts, one on each side of the head. Ancient Egyptians thought all hair to be bestial, since hair and body lice were common problems. Priests shaved all of their head at least 3 times weekly because hairlessness itself was considered divine. Exposure to the sun was a danger. Shaved heads were therefore protected by wigs stiffened with beeswax to repel insects. There is evidence that Babylonians curled, oiled, dyed, and decorated their hair. In the Hindu tradition, children's hair is shaved to control parasites. To scare enemies, the Celts put chalk on their hair to whiten it and then shaped it into a stiff spike. Viking warriors wore long hair, but styled it so enemy soldiers could not grasp it. Since many Native Americans thought one's spirit resided in the hair, they were careful not to touch the hair of others. The scalp spirits of enemies could be brought home and retained as trophies. A strict advocate of sexual dimorphism, the Catholic Church decreed short hair for men and long, covered hair for women. Priestly celibacy and smooth faces were also required. More head hair was for the heathens only. Prostitutes were not precluded from wearing their hair long and loose to advertise their occupation. False hair, especially wigs, was disallowed by the church as the devil's work. The bonfire of the vanities condemned and burned hairpieces of the vainglorious. The Puritans associated the wigs of aristocratic England with vanity and corruption. Even while living in London, Benjamin Franklin absolutely refused to wear a wig. When coming of age, Japanese men had their foreheads shaved and cultivated a ponytail. A samurai warrior shaved the top of his head, smeared oil on the remaining hair, and tied it into a top knot. Mohawk tribesmen shaved their heads and left a ridge of hair right in the middle. Due to the demand for hair fashioning, skilled hairdressers find work in all societies. I think that's a pretty fair statement to make, even though I don't have any empirical evidence of that. I would guess that that's the case. Yeah. In Western societies, big hair, if we've all seen that sort of thing, has been a marker of aristocratic prominence, including the former governor of the state of Texas, who specialized in big hair. As Darwin observed, peoples with abundant facial hair take great pride in their beards and keep them well groomed. He thought wearing beards depended on the extent to which upper-class men feel comfortable displaying their masculinity. Men have styled their beards to precisely demarcate the border between growing hair and bare skin, a clear-cut display of the wearer's self-control. There is data indicating rapid beard growth positively correlates with elevated testosterone and heightened anticipation of sexual activity. In some apes, jut jaw, which is what it's called, displays testosterone, and beards that, on physically imposing men, can also be threatening. Cave drawings show some men without beards and others with facial and head hair. Assyrians wore beards that were forked or square-shaped at the bottom. Hittites displayed carefully braided side whiskers. Male and female pharaohs wore lavish pseudo-beards with gold and silver highlights. Upper-class Celts wore forked-styled or squared beards, along with curled mustaches. In classic civilization, boys celebrated their first shave ritually in a temple, after which their locks were offered as sacrifices to the deities. During the time of Julius Caesar, the nobles were beardless, but once the Christians became shavers, Justinian grew a beard to set himself apart from the Romans. In Islamic lands, beard wearing became mandatory. Muhammad forbade men from swearing oaths by their own beards, so oaths were sworn instead by the beard of the prophet. For many centuries, Jewish men have customarily worn beards. That's actually a joke. Not to be taken totally seriously. Beards were shaved by captors to display subordination of the captured. Christian rulers ordered the conquered Celts and Teutons to get rid of their beards. Japanese conquerors ordered the indigenous Ainu to shave. When Caesar conquered Gaul, he humiliated enemy soldiers by shaving their heads and beards. During the European Middle Ages, only the nobility was allowed to wear beards, and only if they paid the beard tax. One unworthy of noble status would have his beard forcibly removed. Peter the Great ordered the upper class to shave their beards or pay a confiscatory tax of 100 rubles. Resulting at times from bans on beards, long curly mustaches became commonplace in Russia and the armies of many countries. Soldiers with prominent mustaches were called dandies. a code word for sexual predator. Long, thin mustaches were worn for centuries by Asian soldiers, aristocrats, and intellectuals. In mid-19th century Bavaria, the king went so far as to ban mustaches on civilian men. Since beards had disappeared among the Catholic clergy, Protestant leaders promoted beard wearing because beardless faces were considered an excess of the papacy. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the men at her court dyed their beards red as a gesture to the red-haired monarch. The Puritans discouraged all body ornaments, including beards. During the Civil War, beards were common, and sideburns were introduced by, of course, General Barnside. For Amish men, wearing beards is a tradition long observed. A news report a few years ago told how 16 Amish men and women, in a dispute with other Amish, attacked and forcibly cut off their adversaries' beards, an act tantamount to mutilation. After the liberation of France in 1944, female collaborators had their heads shaved as a badge of shame. Hair universally serves as a sexual display, except when covered or tightly blound. He was one of the earlier researchers of hair in the social context. In many cultures, hairstyle change signifies a boy or girl coming of age. Initiation at the onset of puberty can include a first haircut, a new hairstyle, or a head shaving. Examples include a style of braided hair in India and the butterfly hair wings of Hopi initiates. Changing hairstyles can affirm readiness for hunting or availability for marriage. In the U.S. military, some of us have experienced this, men have their heads shaved on the first day of basic training to exhibit submission to authority. Female hair has long been regarded as erotic and even dangerous. Thus, married women must traditionally cover their hair with a hat, hood, veil, or shawl to discourage male attention. Modesty codes that regulate hairstyling can reduce intersexual conflict. Hair parted in the middle can enhance facial symmetry. The families with marriageable women would prefer bridegrooms who are well-groomed. Unkept hair on men and women is universally associated with living on the margins. Depending on cultural context, wild hair can be impressive, threatening, or just strange. Since composers like Beethoven sported hair in disarray, aficionados and performers of classical music were called longhairs. When a scientist said, "Long hair minimizes the need for barbers," it was funny because the scientist was Einstein. Western folk literature features associations between hairiness and wildness, giants, spirits, devils, and a wide array of bestial creatures. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's companion is wild and woolly Enkidu, a semi-human vagabond covered by thick hair. Right there on the right. When a 19th century law established government schools for Native American children, they were forced to conform to white culture and cut their hair short, a strong suggestion that they disown their own cultural identity. People often engage in hair touching, gestures that draw attention to themselves. Men twirl their beards and mustaches, and women touch and brush their hair. Hair can appear to be moving, like coiled springs. Curls express potential motion. A straight-haired woman can also create movement. She can do what's called a hair toss by jerking her head and pushing her hair to the side. Curly hair and hair tossing are attention getters. Spiked hair is threatening. When hair stands on end, fear is expressed. A harebrained or hairy idea is foolish, if not crazy. A completely shaved head can be considered attractive and healthy, since the wearer reveals the whole head to inspection by others. Regularly shaved scalps and faces demonstrate self-control, while uneven hair loss suggests old age or disease. Out-of-control hair may be seen as lacking self-control. Toupees began to be used in Europe during the 18th century to cover bald spots or add volume to thinning hair. In females, noticeable hair loss can accompany estrogen decline at the onset of menopause. Humans have historically been plagued by contagious skin diseases, including alopecia, fungal or bacterial folliculitis, psoriasis, and syphilis. Some scalp diseases are caused by fungi that evolved to metabolize protein in keratin, which is the primary component of hair. Like cues for skin quality generally, uniformity of hair distribution really matters to onlookers. Blotchy hair growth, like mottled skin or discoloration, can be considered contagious and therefore disgust others. Part 2. Now we deal with the nature of Jewish hair. Hair growth and cultural fashioning have two main objectives: regulation of gender dimorphism and compliance with religious norms, both abundant in Judaism. Our text can treat hair as prestigious or degrading. For example, Eve's hair is braided by God to make her beautiful for Adam. Women carefully adorned their hair with extensions of animal hair, wool, and linen. Touching someone's hair connotes trust, even a degree of intimacy. Temporary or permanently damaging someone's hair makes a person liable for monetary damages. The hymn Anim Zmirot anthropomorphizes God's hair as jet black curls of youth. A Gemara treats human hair as a marketable commodity, but a woman's hair should be ripped out if it's used for sorcery. Since women's hair has the sex appeal of erva, which is nakedness, the tradition prohibits married women from displaying their hair in public, an act that may result in divorce. But for single girls, especially brides-to-be, requiring hair to be bound or covered in public was deemed too restrictive. Over time, wearing wigs became controversial. Some authorities said, however, that covering hair with a wig was allowed since the hair displayed was not her own. The Shulchan Aruch asks, can men in a congregation pray if the women have uncovered heads that distract the men? In our time, wig wearing is still disputed. Ovadia Yosef strongly approves, while Moshe Feinstein allowed the practice. Of course, there is no halakha that prohibits men from wearing wigs or toupees. I wonder why that is. Kareach refers to male pattern baldness, which is universally considered unattractive. Korach, I should have drunk a little water. Korach cunningly incited against Moses, causing a rebellion that left a bald spot on Am Haaretz, on Am Yisrael, as the earth swallowed up all the insurrectionists. A Gemara relates how Korach's wife incited against Moses, accusing him of casting his eye on Korach, on his hair, thus causing it to fall out. I will do that. Thank you.
You know, Korach in Hebrew is, if you change the word, the letters, it's Kerach, so it's plural.
It's coming.
Sorry.
No, nothing to be sorry about. A Gemara compares baldness to castration, as evidenced by this aphorism. A man has two wives, one young and the other old. The young wife pulls out the white hairs so he will look younger. The old wife pulls out the black hairs to make him look older. In the end, he is bald all over. It's one way to look at it. Another Gemara reports an exchange of insults between a heretical eunuch and Rav Yehoshua, a sage who was bald. The eunuch begins the insults. "How far is it from here to Bald Town?" Rav Yehoshua retorts, "As far as it is from here to Eunuchville." The eunuch continues, "A bald he-goat is worth only 4 dinars. The sage responds, "A castrated, emasculated he-goat sells for 8 dinars. After more back and forth, Rav Yehoshua delivers the coup d'etat. "Eunuch," he says, "the glory of the face is its beard, the joy of one's heart is a wife, and the heritage bestowed by God upon a person is children." Ouch. In Hebrew, baldness and ice have the same root. So how is baldness related to ice? Until recently, ice could be seen only in wintry landscapes like frozen rivers and frosty patches of ground. Biologically speaking, a grassy landscape and a full head of hair are cues for vitality. Icy ground is to vegetative barrenness as baldness is to old age, ill health, and a lack of vitality. In the U.S., there are 233 mountain peaks with denuded tops that are named baldy. They lack vegetative cover in spring and summer, and in winter, they're covered with snowfall. Nothing is so despised in Judaism as avodah zarah, as idol worship. The Talmud considered blorit a foreign hairstyle associated with idolatry. For this reason, it was sinful for a Jew to wear a blorit style of ponytail. When Joseph was called up from his dungeon to Pharaoh's presence, he meticulously shaved every hair on his body in the manner of Egyptian aristocracy. He thus demonstrated his personal self-control and subjection to Pharaoh. Mating by capture refers to taking fertile females by conquering warriors. Halakha required these beautiful captives to shave their heads, a measure that temporarily cooled the men's lust until the captives finished mourning for their parents. Oh, not yet. And the high priest every Friday. All officiating Kohanim and Leviim were expected to have well-groomed hair, could not be shaved off, left to grow long in mourning, or styled with curls or braids. Another prohibited hairstyle was called lulanite, defined by Rashi as what we would call today cornrows, which is what this is up here on the right. We know what cornrows are. A wife suspected by her husband of adultery, the sotah, is brought to the temple to determine guilt or innocence. Her accused lack of sexual restraint is publicly evidenced as the officiating priest uncovers and dishevels her hair. Masechet Shabbat confirms that the glory of a man's face is his beard. It expresses the sensual part of his countenance. Those are the words used. Those who lead prayer services should therefore have full-grown beards. We are told that Rav Yochanan lacked this distinction of countenance. Ben Sira asserts that one who parts his beard cannot be defeated by even the entire world. Rashi interprets this statement. Bald streaks in the middle of the beard are caused by constant stroking and pulling of men who continuously plot and calculate. Such men are inevitably going to be outwitting their opponents. Hasidim do not trim their beards or side locks, since the Kabbalah visualizes the strands of God's beard to be the flow of life through creation. Wild hair can signal unpredictability or even danger. There are two biblical roots referring to wildness generally and wild hair particularly. The first, Pei Resh Aleph, means someone sexually out of control, a wild-haired enemy, or any occurrence beyond our comprehension. Feresh Ayin describes a reproductively active man. The association between wild hair, masculine prowess, risk-taking, and sexual potency is biologically loaded. Wild hair and wild nature seem related. Rava likens untamed hair to a menacing storm. Elijah, who was a rebel against his establishment, was wild and hairy. Post-exilic prophets dressed in woolly hair cloaks to hide their identity. Nebuchadnezzar dreamed he would become like a beast with wild hair covering his body. The night demon Lilith is pictured with menacing long hair. A 16th century German Kabbalist claimed that male and female demons have faces and bodies covered with hair, although their heads are bald. Seeing someone with hair matted like felt required the blessing Baruch Dayan Emet. In addition to hair, Seir also means he-goat, whose facial hair is similar to that of a man. In biblical lore, he-goats are sometimes demonized, since Seir can also mean satyrs or devils. Humanoid goat demons with big sexual appetites are thought to roam the desert landscapes. When Esau's hairy body is compared with Yaakov's smooth skin, the difference distinguished bestial, uncultured man from prestigious, cultured man. Although never required or encouraged, vowing is defined and regulated in halakha. The reason is simple. While vowing is instigated by individuals, God is tacitly implicated as the vow's solemn guarantor. When a person chooses Nazirut, he or she leaves hair uncut and wild until the vow expires, after which he or she shaves all of the hair off his scalp, his face, and his body, or her body. The Talmud relates a story ascribed to the high priest, Simon the Just. I encountered a Nazir from the south with beautiful eyes, handsome features, and curly locks heaped on his head. After he subsequently cut off his hair, I asked him, "Why, my son, did you destroy such wonderful hair?" He answered, "In my native town, I was a shepherd. When drawing water from the well, I used to gaze at my reflection in the water, a la Narcissus. Then my evil inclination, my Yetzer, attacked, trying to subdue me. So I said to myself, 'Empty fool, why do you involve yourself in a world not your own? For your end is to be food for worms and maggots. I now swear to shear my locks for the glory of heaven only.' Then Simon kissed his head and said to him, 'May there be many Nazirim in Israel like you.'" Is the Nazir's asceticism sinful? The Talmud suggests that if there is blame, it rests on the Nazir's conspicuous public display. Standing out can be status enhancing or degrading, depending on how it's perceived. Anyone who disorders his hair is liable for causing the Nazir to violate his vow. The Nazir's hair thus acquires sacred status. It is no longer the property of the Nazir. As the verse states, the wild growth on the Nazir's head is holy to God. The hair is holy, but the Nazir is not. A Gemara continues, "The Kedusha hair is shaved and burned, since no one may gain benefit from it." Biblical Nazirim are often men of prominence, including Shmuel, Avshalom, and Shimshon. Based on his mother's vow to never cut his hair, the prophet Samuel was considered a Nazir. King David's son, Absalom, attached Nazirite status based on his long hair. Samson's hair was never to be cut. Nonetheless, the Philistines shaved his hair, blinded him, and took him captive. When the hair grew back and his strength returned, he collapsed the temple of the Philistines and achieved his revenge. Our religious texts send mixed messages about hair removal during bereavement. Isaiah prophesied destruction that was likened to baldness instead of well-kept hair. He admonished haughty Israelite women, warning that instead of hairdos, they will have bald heads. When Micah foretold the fall of Israel and Judah, he advised the people to lament their fate by shaving themselves bald like vultures. Jews who mourn by pulling out their hair are said to profane the name of God. When Job mourned by plucking out his hair, it indicated that he was not a Jew. Halakha disavows haircuts for mourners during Shloshim. In Beit Avelim, covered up mirrors help mourners ignore their appearance. Rav Nachman told a butcher told the story of a butcher who sold non-kosher meat and as a result got himself into trouble. To display penance, he let his hair and fingernails grow long. During his war against Avshalom, King David was forced to flee to Jerusalem. When he returned triumphant after Avshalom's death, former commanders who deserted him went to plead his clemency. One of these, Mephibosheth, left his beard unkept to signal subordination to King David. Old age, seva, is unsurprisingly related to gray hair. A more dignified term, zaken, refers to beard and old man. Even when young, a true temple chacham can be called a zaken, obviously even though he's not old. When an older Rav sent a letter to a younger Rav, he enclosed a few of his white hairs. These hairs conveyed the message that the sender had grown old. It was time for the younger man to replace him as Rosh Yeshiva. Since head hair continues to grow until being cut or pulled out, unlike other primates, its ongoing maintenance shows a willingness to groom oneself and others, a very important human prosocial behavior. Shiny, full-bodied hair is a reliable cue for healthfulness and attention to personal hygiene. At its best, hair appeals to our sense of beauty, smell, touch, and movement, universally communicating mate quality in the sexual selection dynamic. There are no secondary sexual characteristics easier to manipulate than our hair. Think about it. As a result, we go to great lengths to achieve hairstylings that reflect personal preferences, cultural conformity, male or female identity, and one's age. Due to its prominent location, head hair can display eminence or shamefulness. People have been occupied with grooming their hair since time immemorial. Much about hair is strongly rooted in religious claims and practices, especially in matters of mate preference. In that way, the intersection of Jewish hair with evolutionary theory reveals great commonality. Comments? Bakasha.
Make sense of how this hair thing evolved. If we say that secondary sexual characteristic is facial hair, or let's say long hair in the female, well, that's fine. Well, why does axillary hair evolve? And why does pubic hair persist? And even if you say that, well, it's covering pubic hair is a reason, it might be covering hair goes way, way back. Adam Harishon covers himself because he goes to shoot. So, your comments.
Well, I mean, I talked initially in the first part of my presentation when I was talking about Darwin. Darwin says that the reason why hair was lost in human beings, why it was selected against, was to expose the skin for certain purposes, could be function, but he thought it was ornamental. So the question is, you're talking about hair in places that really do not function necessarily as a secondary sexual characteristic with much importance. For example, under one's arms. That's a good question. And there are people that are looking at olfactory cues and seeing if that could be a reason. There's been speculation on that. As far as pubic hair is concerned, why that remained while the rest of body hair was mostly gone or not as impressionable, that's a good question also. One could speculate and say that was to call attention to a particular place. I can't think of a better possibility than that, even though no one is obviously come up with any specific answer. Darwin certainly didn't. So we don't know the answer to that question. But some of it remains. It's like any other selection pressure. To grow hair, hair is a resource that costs. Every resource that we grow, that maintains, it will go away if it either impedes something that is adaptive, or if it's too costly and it's not needed, it may.
Or maybe we're looking at it the opposite. From the way we should. Who was it? Morris wrote that book a while back, The Naked Ape.
Yeah.
Where what one can question from there is, why did we lose hair? In other words, the question shouldn't be why did we have hair, but why did we lose hair in the rest of our body?
Well, what I was going to say is we have hair in some places. We've kept it.
Yeah, right.
Very much like it seems to have been in antiquity, but we've lost hair in other places. So it really depends on the particular place. And if I had to answer that question generally, I would say it's a sexual selection issue, which is to say, in our species, the choosing is done by women. It's been done by females. So that selection was done on that basis. What was considered to be attractive, ornamental, for whatever set of reasons. I mean, think about the prominence of where hair is located. If it's under here, it's not so prominent. It's not so easily seen. And I've not read an ethnography in which someone is looking under someone's arm to determine how attractive they are. But prominence here, just like the head generally, the forehead and so on, are the first things that we look at. The face is something that we want to identify. So anything around the face, if it has value in our species to females, males are going to continue to have it, and the same in the other direction. That females retain hair to the extent, and there are also questions of skin color, that the same kind of thing has happened. People have done studies that have determined that. So it's all about sexual selection. It's all about that. We think that these things are permanent and that they were always this way. But if you're an evolutionist, you think about what selection pressures might have been there. And of course, inevitably, it's all about differential descendant leaving. The best quality mate with descendants who continue to be prolific, and everybody knows the rest of that story.
One example I think fits into that, the Yanomamo tribe in South America, and Brazil and Venezuela, the men shave the top of their heads because they also engage in ritualized club fights. And then they rub red ochre into the scars so they're very visible, and both to intimidate other males, and so it's reported they're more attractive to women. Another different example that just you might want to fit in, Catherine Coe, an anthropologist,
Yeah, I know Catherine.
has written a paper on just how traumatic hair loss can be in women cancer patients.
Oh.
And I don't know
Yeah.
details at all. I know there are lawsuits now against chemotherapy drug makers who evidently knew their drugs caused permanent hair loss, but didn't make that public. So just some other examples.
Yeah, I mean, hair is, like I say, hair is not just hair. It's very, very important to people in a lot of ways. Even if you know that someone has, let's say, some visual defect that you would see in their hair or on their face, even if we know that it's not contagious, we have evolved to not take risks on that level. If someone has something that looks like it might be contagious or not so attractive, that's what attractive means, really, in human history more than anything else. What does quality mean? And quality doesn't mean full of disease all over somewhere. So you tend to back off. So these selection pressures can be very interesting if you're an evolutionist, like I say, in determining why things are a certain way. But hair is something that apparently is important to a lot of people. You wouldn't think it would be. Functionally, I'm sure that hair that is considered to be the most important, head hair, scalp hair, facial hair, and so on and so forth, wouldn't be that big of a deal because it really doesn't have much of a function. But the function becomes attractiveness and not so much function.
2 comments and then a question. When I was either a freshman or sophomore in college, we played the roommate game, which was like the newlywed game. And they asked my roommate, what's Paul's favorite part of his body? And he answered his beard. And he was right, that's what I answered, so we matched. So you showed there was a picture of people burning hair in bonfires. About 5 or 6 years ago, there was a whole move among certain Haredi women who apparently got their hair pieces from India.
Yeah.
And they had a question whether that was Avodah Zarah.
Yeah.
And they also burned their hair pieces, and those wigs could run, $10,000 or $20,000. So
Yeah, that was a big issue about whether the hair. India supplies a lot of hair to a lot of women, Jewish women too. So the question is, they go and they cut their hair off in a temple where some kind of avodah zarah is going on. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe Tom knows more about that than I do. I don't know. Do you?
Come again?
That cutting off of hair in India, would that have something to do with idol work, with religious behavior in front of an idol, of an image?
Well, certainly hair plays a big role in South Asia, and a lot of it has to do with sexuality. And so you'll find, especially for women, loose hair means sexually ready, like young girls who can be wed, but as soon as they're married, they take it and pull it straight back and bind it as if they've controlled their sexuality. So, I mean, if you cut off a woman's hair, it's certainly a humiliating moment.
But there are women in India who, it's a business for them, and they're brokers who buy hair, and they traffic in hair, literally. So they're cutting their hair off. I mean, they know it'll grow back and so on, and it's a nice way to make a living. But the question is, for Jews, are they cutting their hair off as a religious behavior in idol worship, or does it? And I think the way it ended up being solved, the problem was that representatives went to the places where this hair was being cut, and they gave a look. They see if there's any bucks, any idols around, and they cut your hair in front of the temple. Wait till you. Huh? It could be. I'm sorry. You also have a.
So the question. So you showed the picture of the American soldiers. Israeli soldiers, boys also cut their hair. Why do they keep it shaven, shorn so short, even after they're not showing the line of submission?
After they're no longer in the army?
Or even in higher ranks, often they keep their hair.
Well, it can get in your way, and when you're in the military, this is my guessing. When you're in the military, you're not really engaged in a sexual selection dynamic so much. Which not only is a question of interaction between males and females, but also an interaction between males and males, and maybe in the army you have females that are around. Mm-hmm. But today, shaving all your head, if you're bald, if you're like me, if you've got baldness, you can shave all of it and it looks good.
Right.
Why is that? I mean, why would that be? That's a good question for all of you. Why would it be that shaving all of your? I think I know the answer, but I'm just curious. If you shave all of your head, why is that more attractive than just having the horseshoe shape? Why would that be?
Because you choose. בעברית? באנגלית שהיא לא טובה. כיוון שזו בחירה של אדם לשלוט בחיצוניות שלו, וכאילו זה מצעיר את העניין, שזה לא בחירה של מישהו אחר, שאתה מבוגר ויורד לך. חוץ מזה שזה עניין של אופנה.
Translate for me, or for everybody.
It's a sign that you're in control of your head and your hair. Besides, it is also a fashion statement.
I think it's a fashion statement because you're able to do that and have it be positive and not negatively perceived, because in fact you're in control. I mean, why? Speaking about symmetry, have you ever seen anybody with a beard on one side and shaved on the other side? Why don't they do that?
That's in college class.
You would think people do all kinds of things to distinguish themselves in unusual ways and to look different. Why haven't they done that? Because I think the answer is because symmetry is so important.
Yeah, if we're associating hair with sexual potency and power, and people in the military shave the knobs, shave their head in a moment of submission to a higher authority. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I see a lot of yarmulkes. What's going on with the yarmulke?
What's going on with the yarmulke that has to do with
I mean, I
hair?
have a theory, but I'm not about to.
No, monks will shave that part of their
That's
head.
exactly right.
And they shave that spot without putting a yarmulke. I mean, the cardinal has a yarmulke on, but
Because the left ear that they used to have was symbolizing the crown of Jesus.
does it? See, I didn't know that. So there's religious significance. David?
I just had 3 comments. You quoted a story, probably from the Babylonian Talmud, about Rabbi Yeshua and in the parallel source in the Midrash called Kohelet Rabbi. The dialogue takes place between Rabbi Akiva and a eunuch. And at the end of the
Wow.
story, the eunuch commits suicide.
Is that right? Well, with that,
It's a very interesting.
that's why I call it a coup de grace, because you don't know what happens to the guy after he's told all those terrible things.
Well, the eunuch is making in the Midrash. The eunuch is making fun of Rabbi Akiva. You look at you Jews, look
Yeah.
at you, So he's making fun of the eunuch. Look at you. And in the end, the eunuch realizes that Rabbi Akiva is better off than he is. The second thing is you mentioned about toupees, that it's permissible, but it's interesting that in halakhic literature there's a discussion as to whether the toupee takes the place of the kippah.
Yeah, that could be.
If you're wearing a toupee, you don't need to cover your head because your head is already covered.
Yeah.
So there are actually responses on that subject. And the third thing that you asked about the yarmulke, the kippah, that's something that I've taught many times. There's an endless amount of literature on the subject because the Jews have been arguing it since the beginning of the Reform movement 200 years ago,
Yeah.
when Jews began to remove the head covering. But throughout most of Jewish history, people didn't wear a kippah or a yarmulke. They wore various types of hats. So the kippah as we know it, I'm looking at here's a mid-kippah here that I'm also wearing one. These are relatively recent inventions. In general, most of the fighting is about whether you need to cover your head with a hat as opposed to not covering your head. And the image that popped to my mind as we were having this discussion is that one of the rabbis who wrote a lengthy responsum saying that you do not need to cover your head was Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh of Modena, who was a very fascinating character in the Renaissance. And one of the few portraits we have of him is that he was bald. he did not have any hair, but he also said you don't have to cover your head. I would have thought that if he was bald, he would want to cover.
Yeah, counterintuitive,
But there's a very nice portrait of him with his bald head uncovered.
That is unusual. A time.
One thing, you mentioned Rabbi Akiva, I immediately thought of the Midrashim about Rabbi Akiva's wife, who sold her hair.
Yeah.
And the removal of hair led to great rabbinical prowess. In other words,
There is, and again, if you didn't see it all over the religious texts, stuff with hair, important stuff, halachot all over the place, you'd think, why would there be that much? But has that diminished much, even in our time? Has it diminished the importance that people put on what their hair looks like or what their face looks like? Not much, I don't think.
The other thing that struck me is you did mention your peyot in the presentation, and payas, right? The meaning of
I've got a chapter on the subject. It's 3-4 times as long as this. I didn't want to bore everybody to tears.
But I always found that the teimanim, they don't call them peyot, they call them simanim.
Simanim for
That's what, I don't know.
Signs.
Yeah, I know it's signs, but signs for what?
Simoni.
Simoni?
Simoni.
So what does that mean?
What does it mean? Masa Simoni?
I just used the, okay, thank you for the proper pronunciation.
It's a sign that you're Jewish.
So,
Oh, that's what it is?
I think it must. It's the most basic. You know, and when I think about that, I think about that picture you showed in the beginning of the Chinese.
With the long ponytail?
They cut everything off.
Yeah.
But they have to keep the, you know, and the same. We have the same. We don't do it as a ponytail. We do it as.
Well, I mentioned also, remember the blorit. And that's what a blorit is. It's shaved here, and the stuff here. You see guys wearing their hair these days also, especially if they're bald. They'll wear this down in a ponytail style, and that was completely awesome. You couldn't do that. If you were a Jew, it was tantamount to doing something very improper.
But we have this. But we have something similar.
Here. But not here. I mean, you know, it's all culture specific. All of it. It's really not a question of what's right and what's wrong. It's a question of what identifies you and what doesn't identify you. And if you're doing something that Jews don't do or aren't expected to do, there are always customs everywhere, and that changes. That hasn't changed all that much, I don't think. And you just want to be something other than what you are, and it's that's why it's not, because there's no real significance to whether it's here or here. You think about it, it's just hair. But hairstyles are very important everywhere. That's why I did the whole survey business. It's very much a mark of cultural identity in which we define our identity, like any group does, as not only what we are, but what we aren't. Very important what we aren't. So the ones that wear their hair like this with a ponytail, we're not, and this is the way we are. Actually, the blorit wearers, this is my chapter, were the vassals somehow of Melech David. Am I right about that? They were not Jewish. They wore a blorit, but they were not Jewish. And I'm not even sure that the Talmud says that they were soldiers. They were young.
In the Tractate of Sanhedrin, yeah.
And so, again, you've got useful non-Jews by King David doing something with those boys. Maybe they were eunuchs. I'm not sure what they were that served his purpose, but it was all about the hairstyle that was either Jewish or it was not Jewish, and you could tell. It's like Job, it was obvious that he was not Jewish because he was mourning by pulling his hair out. That's not a Jewish practice. So it's a way of demonstrating something about yourself. Yes?
Have you done any research on the widow's peak?
No.
And the meaning of that?
What is that? No, I know what it is, but what is that?
What is it? Where did it come from? Widow.
Sarah Lee, explain the term widow's peak.
Widow's peak, when you have
A V right there in the front.
Right, yeah, some on the side, some in the middle.
What does it have to do
It's
with?
supposed to be better than the side. I don't know.
What does it have to do with widows?
That's a question.
What?
I'm asking all the questions.
You know,
How many research on that?
aphorisms come from some.
Ask the robot.
Really. There'll come a time when we can ask a robot that question. Everything comes from somewhere.
And how that has evolved over time.
Well, you know, we retain words, and you know, as I said the last time I made a talk here 2 years ago, the word spirituality. What does spirituality mean now? It means nothing of what it meant in human history. Absolutely nothing. You can have a spirit squad in high school, and they're the cheerleaders. The spirit squad. Right. Are they performing religious behavior and jumping around? They're not. But it's still spiritual. So spiritual now means anything that's kind of emotion-laden, you know, and so on. But in human history, spirits are real spirits, that if I expect the glass to be here, because I thought I put it there, when I finished with it, and it was in another place, I say some of the spirit moved it. And that's the way it was in very, very recent human history. So now forget about going 40, 45,000 years back. So things come, phrases and words evolve in time. There's a semantic shift. I think that's the right word to use. A semantic shift that occurs with phrases and words that you can't always figure where it came from. I mean, you try to. You look it up in etymology, but etymologies are oftentimes, they say, we don't know. If you ever used an etymology, that, you know, I bought a very expensive etymology, and their answer most of the time is, we really don't know. So what good do they do? Any other questions, comments?
Comments is, I want to say,
Sure.
to refer to the the last of the lecture about the robots. The robots they don't need hair. And the second comment I wanted to say is that there is the development, there is no medicine of balding, and this is a question whether we should do something about it if we are becoming more and more robots.
Look, I don't know this, but I will guarantee you there are many pharmaceutical companies spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to answer that question. And believe me, as soon as they did the Rogaine, some people, but that was by accident. It was supposed to protect against something else, and all of a sudden they saw hair growing there, so we found something. But there are people looking for that. But like everything, we haven't solved every problem. Maybe the robots will help us solve it.